This is the Energy Makers Show, featuring the innovators, financiers, and policymakers focused on the global energy demand. Brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome to another episode of the Energy Makers Show. Today, first up, Vincent Polito, president of Total Energy USA, telling us about his upcoming conference and trade show scheduled for November 27th through 29th in Houston, bringing together all forms of energy under one roof for the first time in the U.S. Then Paul Dickerson sits down with Dave Lee, co-founder of the Covelo Group, the company helping large engineering construction firms by addressing the challenge of finding top talent in the energy sector. All of that after this.
Where will the energy come from to move us forward? From natural sources in abundant supply, or perhaps a man-made source? At NRG, we believe innovation will solve our energy needs. That's why NRG is moving away from fossil fuels towards wind, solar, and other sustainable technologies to power the smart grid, the electric car, and our clean energy future. We're using all of our energy to develop more of it.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show.
Hi, I'm Russ Capper, and welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. My guest today, Vincent Polito, the president of Total Energy USA. Vincent, welcome to the Energy Makers Show.
Russ, thanks very much for having me.
Okay, well, tell us about Total Energy USA.
Total Energy USA is a conference and trade show that will be running for the first time in Houston, November 27th through the 29th. And it brings together all forms of energy under one roof, both in a trade show, exhibit floor environment, as well as in a conference environment, where we will cover issues that cut across all forms of energy and talk about energy efficiency as well.
Okay, so you say for the first time. Is there a second and third time perhaps
Absolutely.
Planned?
Well, two things. First, the event concept, as much as sometimes I claim credit for it, it's not really my concept.
Okay.
It's a concept that has run very successfully in other parts of the world, most notably Aberdeen, Scotland, and Melbourne, Australia, where they have events ongoing. This event, we're holding dates in Houston from now to infinity. We are working very closely with the George R. Brown and with the Greater Houston CVB to produce the event here annually.
Okay, and so whose idea was it to launch this?
I'm working very closely with city officials, most particularly in the Greater Houston CVB, and we were trying to think about events, build events, create events that really were reflective of the Houston economy.
Thus, we end up with energy, for sure. So, total energy, and you've kind of described it already as the broad spectrum, but we're talking about clean energy, solar energy, bio, hydro, nuclear, everything?
Right. Yeah, there really are great energy events in Houston, and you could argue that there's an energy event in Houston weekly.
Right.
But I think what happens very often is that in renewables events, traditional fuels aren't always treated with the same TLC.
Right.
And in traditional fuels events, renewables don't really get much shelf space either necessarily. And this event, we have no bias. We really are a level playing field. We want all forms of energy to play. Everybody's been asked to participate in this event, whether it's coal, clean coal, nuclear, renewables. Everybody has, anybody who's in the space, whether it's from a media standpoint, association standpoint, we have offered and asked and been more than willing to provide a forum and an opportunity.
Well, on the Energy Makers Show, we've found that alternative energy space and the traditional fossil fuel space, there's all sorts of opportunities when they start getting together.
Yeah, most of the big analyst firms, when you ask sort of the generic question, renewables versus traditional, friends or foe, most say they need to be friends. And what you'll find from a technology standpoint, where they're getting a lot of the engineers and a lot of the talent is from traditional fuels. And if you look at some of the biggest players, and I'll use Shell for an example, and Shell is one of the biggest exhibitors and sponsors of Total Energy, but Shell has energy projects ongoing across the entire spectrum. BP has energy projects going, and I think most of the large oil and gas companies would say that.
Yeah, okay. So what would one expect to see if they attended the conference?
I think you would see a conference program that is at an entirely different level from a lot of the conference programs you see that have to focus on a single slice. And we'll cover issues like water, the electric grid. An interesting keynote from my perspective is Jonathan Kraft, the president, owner of the New England Patriots.
Right.
He'll be talking about his the entire energy decisions they make across their entire company, which is Patriot Place, the football stadium, the parking lot, and they do energy efficiency things that are quite unique and quite novel.
Okay.
I think that's very interesting. In energy, everybody knows workforce development is a key issue.
Right.
And how do we train our students to come out with the proper skills to work in this space? And Brian Kelly of U.S. News and others will be talking about that, very important issue. So I think you'll see issues that cover parts of the energy equation, parts of energy efficiency, and then some of these cross-cutting issues that touch them all. Another very exciting session, PKF Texas has organized a session entitled Making Energy Decisions, Financial Decisions in Challenging Times. And they've put together a panel of leaders, CFOs, and others in the space, and talking about geopolitical issues, energy market issues, and how to make those difficult decisions.
Okay, it sort of sounds like it has more to do with intelligence and people parts of the business compared to the offshore technology conference where you have big drilling rigs and stuff show up.
Right. I mean, the offshore drilling, OTC is one of the greatest shows in the world.
Right.
And I love that show.
Right.
But we do talk about issues for energy buyers, people who are making an energy buying decision, whether it's a restaurant chain that runs all over the country, may make different decisions.
Right.
Whether it's a college campus, might make several different energy decisions. If you're part of an energy company and you want to get a better base understanding, I think it's quite valuable.
Okay.
So yeah, our audiences are different. Our exhibitors are largely the same, but I think the people attending, you'll see a little bit different.
Okay, so once again, what are the dates?
November 27th through the 29th, George R. Brown.
Okay, and if somebody wanted to perhaps know a little bit more, you got a website address?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You bet.
TotalEnergyUSA.com.
Okay.
And if you want to reach me directly, V. Polito, Polito, at TotalEnergyUSA.com.
All right, Vincent, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing this with us.
Russ, thank you very much.
You bet. That's Vincent Polito, the president of Total Energy USA. And we'll be back with more right after this.
This is the Energy Makers Show, brought to you by NRG, moving clean energy forward. And now, back to the Energy Makers Show with your host, Paul Dickerson.
Welcome back to the Energy Makers Show. Our guest now, Dave Lee, co-founder of the Covelo Group. Dave, great to have you on the program.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you.
So tell us about Covelo.
Covelo addresses a very unique challenge. We work with large engineering construction firms addressing this talent shortage that exists. And it's very unique to the energy sector, as you probably know. So we basically act as a facilitator. We act as a vendor management company. We reside on-site at our client locations. We orchestrate a very complex symphony of the things that are needed to recruit these mid to high-level engineers. And we manage basically a large supply chain of vendors across the world to help them find the right people.
Well, and break that down a bit. So if someone were to look at you and say, all right, you're a recruiter of engineering talent, you would say, no, I'm not that. Instead, you're...
We act more as a facilitator. So I think that's a very important distinction. We purposely do not recruit because we want to be very neutral in the playing field. So our philosophy is it really requires a small army of some of the best recruiters around the world to meet this gap.
Yeah.
And no single agency or even a single human resource department can really effectively manage this type of stuff. And so what we do is we act as an expediter. We sit in the middle. And so we manage a whole series of agencies that are very disciplined in what they do. And some of them are very specialized. They might specialize in a certain region of the world. They might do executive search. They might focus on a certain discipline. But our philosophy is you need a small army of these companies to really effectively make it happen.
Well, and then what was your company and the need for it born out of frustration from these energy companies that they couldn't find the right engineering talent to fill the gap with any one particular recruiter? So they said, all right, Dave, talk to them all and find us our people?
Exactly. It's actually how I got into the energy sector. I'm the only one in my company that's not an engineer. My background is management consulting. So I was recruited by one of the largest oil and gas companies in the world to specifically look at this recruiting issue that they had.
Right.
And it basically went from a human resource dilemma back in the mid-2000s to becoming a board level issue, because to these large EPCs, if they didn't have the right personnel to execute these projects, there was a cost to the organization. There's a cost in the vacancy of those positions, because those are billable hours. And then there's ultimately a cost in the risk of managing multi-billion-dollar projects. And so it was really at the board level that brought me in. I studied this space for about 2 years, and I looked at kind of the whole ecosystem of recruiting. And the one area that I felt this company, and ultimately all companies, were very ineffective at doing was managing it and really leveraging the expertise that existed out there of these recruitment firms. And so I created kind of this supply chain management model.
What created this gap that you're filling?
It's a great question. I think it's a perfect storm in many ways. The energy sector had a big crash in the 80s, and if you look at the enrollment of engineers, particularly in North America, it really dropped off, and that's kind of what instigated the initial part of the gap. There literally were, especially if you look at petrochemical engineers, it almost completely stopped in terms of the number of graduates coming out of universities in the 80s and 90s, and we're just beginning to catch up. In addition to that, you have this well-seasoned age group of workers that are now getting ready to retire. This is the big crew change that everyone's been talking about, so that's impacting it. And then on top of that, in the last decade, there's been a really big increase in projects worldwide, which is great for the industry. But it's really kind of made it even more severe in terms of when you look at talent. So for these large companies in particular, it's a pretty serious problem, because everybody's looking for very similar levels of talent across all disciplines. And nobody has a real clear-cut answer on how to do that. And then on top of that, the long-term strategy of how to retain those folks is very complex as well.
And again, in the energy space, these are not just U.S. domestic issues, right?
Right.
We're looking around the world.
This is definitely a global issue. If you look at the Houston-based energy companies, they have execution centers around the world. Certainly a bulk of the work is done in a lot of cases in Houston, but there are projects happening all over the place. And so it's a very complex problem for these organizations.
So as you look to 2013 as an entity, what are some of your challenges?
Our challenges are really just related to continuously evolving with our customers and assisting them in kind of the next layers of the human resource challenges that they have. I think if you look at it holistically, the front-end recruiting is really a very short-term issue, and we resolve that. I think we've been very effective in doing that. I think our next challenge as an organization is how do we continuously evolve and really get even further down that channel in assisting with the longer-term retention issues that they're also facing.
Well, thank you for coming in today. Exciting times ahead.
I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
And that wraps this episode of the Energy Makers Show, heard on the radio nationwide, seen right here at TheEnergyMakers.com. I'm Paul Dickerson, and we'll see you next week.